In today's video, we're going to be doing the sew along of the Laundry Day Tea by LoveNotions. So if that interests you, do stay tuned. Welcome back to my channel. If we're just meeting, my name's Claire, and on this channel I offer all things sewing and dressmaking, and I look specifically into plus size dressmaking. So if that interests you, do hit the red button below. So a little while ago, Akram from Akram's Ideas approached me and asked me if I would like to take part in this year's Sewtember. It's a challenge that I was watching last year, so I jumped at the chance to be a part of it this year. So the idea is that some vloggers make up free patterns that are available on the internet. Then you guys can take part by making up what we make up in the sew along, and you can be entered into a competition to win goodies. We have some great sponsors. I'll put the sponsors on screen now. Akram asked myself, Kim from Dorothy's Daughter, Whitney from Whitney Sews, Megan from Megan Sullivan, and Elizabeth from Elizabeth made this, and we all made things up. Akram has created a playlist, which I will link below in my description box, so do check out everyone's videos afterwards, and hopefully there will be something that one of us have made that you would like to make too. The competition is open until the 13th of October, so you still have plenty of time to take part if you're seeing this video when it is released. So let's get on to my sew along. I'm making the Laundry Day Tea by LoveNotions, as I've mentioned. I'll put a picture here. So I've gone into a fair amount of detail in the sew along because I want it to appeal to people new to sewing jersey. So there's lots of tips and tricks as we go along. I've made a couple of adjustments. So I brought my shoulder in and I've done a 2-inch FBA. So I have included instructions on how to complete those things in there as well. But it's such a quick and simple make. You will love it. So let's get into it. So in order to make this pattern, you're going to need your pattern. So you'll need to print off your A4 printouts and stick them together, or send off for your A0 pattern as I've done here. You'll need your fabric, and we'll talk a little bit more about fabric in a moment. I used about 2 meters of fabric, but it depends on how long you want your garment and how wide the fabric is. You'll need paper. My paper's on a roll, so it's too big to put on here, but you will need paper, and you will need a pencil as well. I'm going to use a friction marker so it shows up on camera and I can iron it off because heat will erase this pen. You will want to use a pencil if you're doing it yourself though, because a thick marker like this will leave thick lines and it will take away from the size of your pattern. So do use a pencil. You'll need a measuring tape to measure yourself. You'll need fabric scissors. You may need a seam ripper. You'll need pins and you'll need rulers. I've got a straight ruler, an 18 by 2 here. And I also have a curve. You'll only need a curve if you're going to make any alterations to the neckline. You'll also need a sewing machine or a serger. I'm going to use my serger, but do feel free to use a sewing machine. Some sewing machines will have a stretch stitch, but if they don't, you can just use a zigzag. I will talk about that within the sew along as we go along. So that's it, let's get started. So when you download the pattern, it will come with 2 files, and one is A4 pattern pieces, which you print off on your home printer and then you put together. I'm not going to go into detail about how to do that, but there are some good tutorials around. I know Jessica Lorraine on her channel has a good tutorial on putting that together. Or it comes with an A0 file which you send off to a copy printers, they print it and send it to you, which is what I've done here. And when you do that, you get all your pattern pieces on a big piece of paper or a couple of pieces of paper, as is the case with me. I've opened my pattern piece and I just want to go through the pattern pieces with you because on first glance they do look a little bit confusing. So this is my sleeve piece and it actually goes a little bit longer down there. This is probably the most simple piece because it's on the fold, so you don't even have two different curves for front and back like you would on a woven. And what's more, they've put in cut lines if you want a short sleeve to cut here, if you want an elbow length sleeve, cut here, and if you want it to go down to 3/4, cut there, and to the bottom for a long sleeve. So that could not be more simple. Before you trace off, you'll want to know what size you need to cut. I will be cutting an XXL, so that's the second to largest line. And I'll also be doing an elbow length sleeve as that is my go-to. You'll need to decide how long you want your pattern piece. Another good tip is when you trace it off, fold your tracing paper in half and put the fold there on the fold line. I will show you how to do that in a minute. So here is the top half of the shirt front and back. So the front and back are the same pattern pieces except for this much of the top. There are other pattern pieces that you lay on top to get your back pattern piece, which I'll show you in a minute. You'll decide which size you are, lay your paper on it, it's on the fold. If you wanted to cut your pattern out flat, then do the same as you did with the sleeve and fold your tracing paper over. I didn't do that, so I just had a flat piece of tracing paper. I'll be making some adjustments to this. If we're talking about the front piece, which is just this pattern piece, and it goes down off the page, and you can see it goes all the way up here. So it's a long dress, and that's because there it goes below your knees, above your knees, tunic length, or you can even have it as a t-shirt. I'll be making two adjustments to this pattern, and that is I'm going to bring the shoulders in by 1 inch because they hang off my shoulder just a tad too much, and that will mean bringing the shoulder in but also adjusting this arm shape here, and then I will trace down to tunic length. This is for a round neck, but if you wanted a V-neck there is a piece for that. This is the top of the pattern for the V-neck, so you just trace it off as I've explained for the main piece, and then at the lines you would attach it on the lines here. This piece is upside down. You would turn this round and place it on that, and then use this top instead of this to trace your pattern piece off. And you would do the same for the back as you did for the V-neck. So you just trace this off as you need it, then attach it to the main pattern piece on the dotted lines, and that will give you your back piece. The only other piece left to talk about is the neckband. So you'll want to cut this neckband out to your size on the fold. I don't tend to cut these because they're just a rectangle, and I like to work out how long I want it myself based on the thickness of my fabric. But if you are new to sewing, I would recommend that you trace this off and use this. You can always amend your fabric if you need to as you go along. So I've got my folded tracing paper here. So as you can see, it's just got a fold line there. So you just fold that up, line it up with the centre of the arm piece, like that. Put your pattern weights on it and trace it. If doubling up on the paper makes it too thick, you can just open it up like that, put the fold on the fold line, trace it, then close it, and then cut it out. So let's get on with that now. So I've traced it out, as you can see. I've done it in blue so you can see it. And so because I traced it with the fold there on the fold line of the pattern piece and cut both pieces of paper out, I now have a flat pattern piece. So I have the option of either cutting it flat or folding it over and cutting it on the fold. And that just means that I will have more leeway in terms of cutting out my fabric and making the most out of my fabric. So first off, I'm going to explain how to do the shoulder adjustment. So I bring the shoulder seam in closer to my neck so it doesn't hang off my shoulder. It's really simple. Now this will not avoid gaping in the centre front, but it will bring the sleeve head up to where it should be at the top of the arm. So you can see what I've done here. First of all, you need to decide how much you want to bring it in by. I've brought mine in by 1 inch. So I want the width of the shoulder to be the same. So I'm not enlarging the length of the shoulder seam at all. I'm just moving it. So what I've done is I've marked 1 inch in from the shoulder seam on the neck side and 1 inch in from the shoulder seam on the arm side, as demonstrated in this illustration. Then I've just drawn the new shoulder seam line, then I've blended it in with the neckline and the arm side, as you can see on the picture. So it's just as simple as that, and that's all I've done. I didn't need much of an adjustment. And so if your t-shirts hang off the edge of your shoulders a little bit too much, then it might be worth doing this. So now we're going to do a full bust adjustment. This is super simple. First off, you need to find your apex and mark it on the pattern. You can do that by holding the pattern up against you, or you can get the measuring tape and measure from your shoulder down to your apex, and then from your side seam to your apex, and that will give you where you need to mark. So now we want to draw some lines on the pattern. You'll need your straight ruler for this. You want to draw a line from the shoulder seam down to the apex. As you can see on my picture that I've done it fairly close to the edge, but you want it at least 5/8 in. You'll want another line from the apex down to the hem and one from the apex to the centre front. On the line you've just drawn, you'll want to cut from the hem all the way up to the shoulder, going past the apex. You can see on the picture here how that has worked. You don't want to cut through the shoulder, but you want it close enough that you have a pivot point. Sometimes cutting your seam allowance from the other side and then cutting up to your seam allowance can work. And then you want to cut from the apex to the centre front, and that small line will come away completely. So now you'll want to place some pattern paper underneath. First of all, you'll want to sellotape the apex point down. So you want to open your pattern piece on the arm side as wide as you need an FBA. If you need to go up by 1 cup size, that would be 1 inch. Go up by 2 cup sizes, that would be 2 inches, etc. I did a 2-inch FBA. And then when you've got your required amount of inches open, you can then sellotape that down. The long slender rectangle that you can see on screen is the centre front piece, and you just need to move that down so it's level with the hem, as you can see in this picture. So where I've drawn those few lines, you can see there's a bit of space there, and that space in the middle is the extra space created by the FBA. So now you can sellotape your pattern all done, and you're done. Let's talk fabric for a moment. The pattern says that you should use a fabric with at least 40% stretch. Now, I don't tend to pay much attention to that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't either. I would recommend you follow their instruction. In order to find the stretch, you'll need a ruler. You'll need to take notice of 0 to 10 inches, or you can do this in centimetres as well. What you want to do is lay your fabric flat along the ruler. Take your finger at 0, take your finger at 10, keep your finger at 0 and just stretch it. Mine stretches to 13, so that means I've got a 30% stretch, which isn't quite enough for this pattern, but I think it's enough to do this, and I haven't had any problems with other fabrics that are 30%. So you need to make your own decision about that. So in terms of fabric types, you want anything that's light and flowy. I'm using this, I'm not sure of the composition to be honest. It feels natural, like natural cotton jersey. And it is very drapey, if you see that. And the pattern states that the drapier the fabric, the better. So do consider that. I did start this Sewalong before and I was using a black and white scuba and it just wasn't working, especially around the neckband. So you don't want anything that's going to be too heavy. So once you've made your fabric choices, we'll move on to sewing the garment. The first thing you'll want to do is put your front and your back piece together at the shoulders with right sides of the fabric facing each other. Once you've done that, you'll lay your ribbon across the top on the wrong side of the fabric and pin that together. So once it's pinned together, take it to your sewing machine and sew a line of stitching across, and you'll do that at 3/8 of an inch. The reason for this ribbon is so that your shoulder seam doesn't stretch out and lose shape over time. You can actually sew this seam in a straight line if you wish, because it's not going to stretch out because the ribbon's not going to let it stretch. So there is no issue there. If you prefer, you could use the lightning stitch or a zigzag stitch. If you have a serger, you could serge it, and that's what I'm going to do. So as you can see here, I have serged my shoulder seams and I've got a little bit of excess there, and you may well too. You can either trim that off or leave it there as it is. As mine is iridescent and it's not going to pose a problem in terms of colour, I'm going to just leave it, but if it irritates you, you may want to trim that off. So now we're going to attach the sleeves to the shoulders. Now because the front and the back side of the sleeve is the same, it doesn't matter which way or which sleeve you put on which. When you cut your fabric out, you should have put a notch in the centre, and that will be your shoulder seam. Then you'll line up each end with each end of the main piece, and then you'll want to pin it. I would advise pinning it because you have two different types of curve there and they will fight against each other. In order to get an even sew, do pin all the way around. As you can see, I've pinned all around the seam line. Now you want to sew a line of stitching 3/8 of an inch all the way around. And if you're using your sewing machine, you definitely want to use a zigzag or lightning stitch for that, not a straight stitch, as this area will receive some tension when you're wearing it. So do that for both sleeve holes. So I've gone ahead and I've sewn the seam as instructed. I used my serger and the left needle came undone. So I did go ahead on the sewing machine and do a lightning stitch just to give it that extra security. So now we're going to hem the sleeve. Now you could have done this before you attach the sleeves or afterwards, it doesn't matter. So you're going to decide how much you want to turn your sleeves up by. I'm going to turn mine up by 1/2 inch twice. So I'm going to go to the ironing board and iron that in place now. So I've ironed the hem up twice, so as you can see, I'm just going to do a straight stitch very close to the edge of that hem on my sewing machine. So I've done a straight line. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it because it's in white, but I have done that. I'm going to go back to the iron and just press that in place to secure the stitches, and then we'll sew up the side seams. So what we do now is sew up one side of the side seam. So bring your sides together. So you'll need your sleeve piece to meet, and then your hem down here. Where the sleeve matches the main body, that seam, you'll need to match that up with the other side. When you've matched that up, put a pin in, and it's helpful to put one seam allowance one way and one the other way, as that will help it stay in place when it goes through the serger or sewing machine. You can pin the entire side if that makes you feel more comfortable, or you can just go ahead and sew up, making sure that seam aligns, and obviously the sleeve end and the hem end aligns too. Before we start the second side seam, we're going to hem the garment, and that's just doing the same as you did with the sleeve when you hemmed the sleeve. So you just fold it over twice and do a straight stitch close to the edge. So let's do that now. As explained, I folded over twice and hemmed it. You can just decide how thick you want your hem and hem it any way you want. Some people might serge the bottom and turn it under. This is just my favourite way of doing it. So now we're going to sew the second side seam up as we did before. Not sure if you can see that, but I'll do a close-up. I did a perfect seam there, and that is because I put the side seams together in opposite directions. It just jimmies it into the right place, especially on the serger. Not so much on the sewing machine, but it will help. At this stage the dress is almost done. All we need to do now is add the neckband and we're done. Don't forget to snip all your loose threads. For creating your neckband, you can either use the pattern piece that came with the pattern, in which case cut your strip of fabric out from that, or you can measure your neck hole and determine your length from that, and that's what I'm going to do. So all you'll want to do is start at one seam and put the tape measure round. You may want to stand the tape measure up like that. That's just because the neckline's on a curve and it will give you the most accurate measurement. So you just want to go round like that, all the way round. Then round the back of the neckline to there. Mine's 34.5 inches. I want it between 20 and 30%. So I'm going to take 8 inches off, which will mean I need to cut 26.5 inches plus my seam allowance. So that's what I'm going to do now. As a side note, you can just cut on the straight grain because it's jersey fabric, it will stretch. But if you've got a jersey fabric that stretches more one way than the other, you want to cut it the way with the most stretch. So I've got a scrap piece of fabric that I'm going to use here. Now I need to think in terms of how wide I want it. So I want it about 3/4 of an inch wide. So I need that to be double that because it's going to be folded over. So that's 1.5. Then I want to add a seam allowance. So I want to add a seam allowance of 3/4 of an inch. In total, I need to cut 2.25 inches wide by 26.5 inches long. But that's just mine. You need to work out your own or use the pattern piece. So I've cut my piece out now. So the first thing I'll do is put my right sides together and sew a stitch across there. I'm going to serge it, but you can use your sewing machine. So I have serged that shut now. Once you've sewn that, you'll want to press to one side or press open if you've used your sewing machine. Now you want to fold your band together like this, lengthways, and go and press that. So I've pressed that in half now. What I'm going to do, and this isn't a necessary step, but because my fabric is so flimsy, it will help me keep it together. I'm just going to serge around the edge, and that'll give me a bit more stability while I'm attaching it to the main body of the garment. So you can either serge that, or you could stitch a basting stitch just around the edge, but do a wide zigzag. I've just run a rough stitch around the edge just here on my serger. I made sure not to take any excess off with the blade. The bit that's stitched will disappear when we attach our garment. So now what we need to do is divide our band up in equals, either in 4 or 8. I'm going to do 8 because that gives me more control when I'm sewing it. You want to put a pin in where your seam line is. Fold that seam line and find the other opposite end. So find the opposite end and stick a pin in there. Then you want to bring your 2 pins together, pull the band tight to find your next quarter. And then you'll do that again with the other end like this. So now you have 4 pins in the band at equal spaces. So you've got 1, 2, 3 and 4. And that might be good enough for you, but I'm going to put in another 4 just for the added security of getting the band stretched equally. So you want to take 2 pins that are sat next to each other, bring them together as you did with the pins just now, fold the band, and where your crease is where you want to put another pin. And then you just do that for the rest of the band. So as you can see now, I have 8 pins, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they're all equally placed. Now we have to do the same with the neck hole on the garment. So let's put the band aside. For this bit, rather than use pins, I'm going to use my marker. If you're going to use a marker, make sure it's a removable marker, and do test it on a scrap bit of fabric before marking your actual garment, because you don't want to ruin your garment, and this will show on the actual front. First of all, we want to find the centre of the back and the centre of the front. Just in case you think the seam lines are a quarter of the way between the front and the back, that's not the case, and you'll see that in a minute as we measure. So I've brought my seam lines together and folded the back of the fabric. Where the fabric's on the fold there, that is your centre point of your back. So fold the front with the seams matching, pull tight, and where it's folded is where you want to make a mark. So now we have the front and the back marked. We want to bring them together in much the same way as we did with the band. You want to bring those 2 marks together and pull your fabric tight. Where it folds at the other end is where you want to mark it. And do the same for the other side. So now we have 4 marks, 1, 2, 3 and 4. And you'll notice here the mark is not on the seam line for the shoulders. Because I'm using 8 pins, I need to go ahead and put some more marks in. So I'm going to bring 2 marks together that are sat next to each other, fold the fabric and then make a mark at the other end. And then I'm going to do that for the other 3 points around the neck. So now I have 8 marks placed equally around the neckline. So I'm going to match the marks up with the pins by pinning the band to the neckline, making sure the seam lines are at the centre back for the band and that you're pinning right sides together. So now I have the neckband pinned to the garment. It's time to sew. It's at this time I pull the fabric taut to assess whether the band is the right width, and I think it is. You want to pull the band so it goes taut, and that just means it won't stand away from your shoulders when it's on you, and that looks good. As you can see, when it's relaxed, there is too much fabric on the main neckline, which is what you want. Pull it tight and you've got a nice bit of tension there. So I would advise that you go and sew a basting stitch, and you can just use a straight stitch to do that, because you will sew it again when you know it's all on correct. But I'm going to go ahead now and sew it up on the serger because I'm pretty confident that it is correct. Also, if you're sewing on the serger, you may want to start at a side seam, so that when your garment is on the hanger, you won't have that funny join bit from the serger showing. And also when you're wearing it, it'll be hidden under your hair, under your top. So that's what I'm going to do now. So once you've sewn your neckband, you want to just go round and check it. Make sure you have caught all the fabric in. And I haven't there. You can see, got a big hole. So I'm going to have to go over that bit again with the serger. So that looks all good now. So now I'll go and press the seam so the seam is facing down, and then we'll be top stitching. So I've ironed the seam down, and now I'm going to top stitch just using a straight stitch. It doesn't, some people are under the impression it needs to be a zigzag. It doesn't, because it's just going to sit on your neckline. So I will be doing a straight stitch. So go ahead, trim your threads and press your neckband, and then you're done. So I hope you liked the sew along and you found it really useful, particularly those of you who are new and wanting to make this. As you can see from the fabric, I am actually wearing my make now. I'm going to insert some footage here because you won't be able to see the full lot of the dress, but I'm really happy with it. I'm not going to go into too much detail now because I am going to upload a review video for the Laundry Day Tee in the next week or so, because I'm making a couple of others. So my husband came home from work yesterday and very kindly gifted me some fabric, and this is what he's got me. It's really lovely. It's a jersey. That's quite stretchy, so it's easily 40% stretch as needed for this pattern. So I am going to make up another Laundry Day Tee. So I'm going to do that in the next day or so. I'm not sure if the colour suits me or not, or if it washes my skin out a bit, but I'm desperate for some everyday comfy wear. So I'm going to whip up another Laundry Day Tee in this. I'm also going to complete the black spotty one that I mentioned in the sew along. And then I'm going to do a review of the pattern, and that will come later in the week, maybe in about a week's time. So I mentioned that the pattern was a free pattern. If you head over to Facebook and join the LoveNotions group over there, once you're approved, you will be able to download the pattern for free. There's also a children's pattern that's for free as well. So if you want it for free, do go over there and join that group. If you'd prefer to pay for it, I think it is going for $5 at the moment on their website, and I will put an affiliate link below. But as I say, it is available for free, so you'd be mad not to go over to the Facebook group and join up over there. I really hope that you guys will take part and make the Laundry Day Tee up. I know a few of you have been talking about wanting to do it, and some of you say it's your favourite pattern already. So I really look forward to seeing your entries for Sewtember, and do go and check out Akram's playlist so you can see everyone else. So I asked on my chatty video before which sew-alongs you would like to see from the patterns I have, and there were two that people kept commenting on, and that is this skirt pattern. So that's K6843. So I will be making that at some point. And I'm also going to do a sew along of this one, which is Lisette B6423. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, or you like to see pattern reviews, challenges and other videos relating to plus size dressmaking, do hit the subscription button below, click the notification bell, then you'll be notified when new videos are released. Don't forget to like the video if you like the content. Also leave me a comment because I love chatting to you guys. So until next time, bye for now.
You can fly higher than the sky.